This episode is brought to you by Commerce, parent company of BigCommerce, Feedonomics, and MakeSwift.
How do you define value and what is the opportunity of that? And I think that that's relevant across, all brands and in a multitude of ways, because it's not just about price. Yes, it's going to matter. And a lot of the times you have to play, when you pay with your wallet, there's going to be certain elements that make you more price sensitive than not. But, I think especially the younger generations, it's no new news. They call bullshit on things. They do their own research. They want brands that will stand for something more than just selling them products. And a lot of that is when they think about value, a lot of them want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And that is a value that a brand can give.
Welcome to Retail Remix. With all the talk of AI and TikTok trends, it can be easy to forget that the vast majority of shopping still happens at stores, but it's true. We all love the convenience of e-commerce, but there's just something about shopping that can't be replicated online. And my guest today is an expert at tapping into that secret sauce. Melissa Gonzalez is a principal at the global architecture and design firm MG2, where she brings together her knowledge of architecture, brand strategy, and experiential design to help retailers create environments that excite and drive results. We're going to discuss some of the best examples of that out in the wild today and dig into new research MG2 has conducted on what's driving Gen Z in particular to stores. Welcome, everyone, to Retail Remix. I'm your host, Nicole Silberstein, Editor-in-Chief at Retail Touchpoints. And today we have with us Melissa Gonzalez, a principal at MG2 and founder of the MG2 Advisory. Thanks for being here, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me.
So to start off, I was hoping you would just tell us a little bit more about the work that you do at MG2.
Sure, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm a principal at the firm in what we call consumer experiences. So that's kind of all environments that consumers inhabit, retail, FB&E, but we also kind of cross into user-centric thinking as a whole. And that's where you bring kind of the MG2 advisory thought process there. And really the spirit of that is ensuring that we're always keeping the user, whether it's the consumer or the resident, et cetera, at the heart of everything we do. So at the firm, I'm a really dedicated champion to that thinking, and I lead our team that embarks on year-round research and insights around what are we seeing around trends, macro trends, micro trends, behaviors. What does that mean around opportunities when we think about user-centric design, the programming, the journey, the key touch points, the design elements, and then working really closely with both our clients and our design teams to elevate the opportunities best as possible, allowing for the creation of environments that truly resonate and create long-term lifetime loyalty. And then I work really closely also from like a kind of an innovation standpoint with our organization, whether that's making sure that we're being explorative around things like AI and the opportunities of that. And like you, I host a podcast called Retail Refined. And so I'm having these active conversations with thought leaders all the time. And I'm actively making sure that I bring that intel back to the organization as well, right? Because we can be so internal sometimes and thinking about what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and how are we always staying ahead of the curve as best as possible.
I love that phrase, user-centric design for things like residences and stores. It's really interesting. It really hits the nail on the head, but we don't often think of like shoppers, for example, as users. When you hear the word user, you kind of think of it in a digital context. So that's really interesting. We have you here today, though, because we're hoping that you'll also share some of that intel that you're getting with all of us as well. And so I'm glad you mentioned your podcast, because I noticed that you just did like a mid-year recap of the most intriguing conversations you've had so far this year. And I was hoping you would share some of the highlights with our listeners, like what ideas and stores in particular have you found really exciting the first half of 2025?
Yeah, I've been so lucky in some of the conversations that I've had for sure. Giovanni, who's the SVP of Global Visual and I think now Stores, he had a little bit of a title update at Coach. And I mean, whether it's on my podcast or grabbing lunch with him, like he is just full of energy and innovative thought process. And for me, what I get inspired about with him is they actually do a lot of the stuff they say, like a lot of people talk it. And I think the way Coach has transformed has been tremendous. But what I love about what they do is they really kind of go deep in thinking about if we're going to create adjacent experiences like bars or restaurants, cafes, etc., like really doing the recon, and I think that we underestimate the opportunity of what that looks like a lot of the times. And for our design teams at MG2, I'm always pushing them and our advisory teams, like, make sure you're getting out there. It's a great thing to canvas online and you look at Pinterest. But what I love that Coach does that I also push our team to do is like they get out there. When they come up with new concepts, if you go to his Instagram, Giovanni's always posting stories, so you could find that. But when they came out with the cafes, like they would spend days going to the coolest and best cafes all over Manhattan and Brooklyn and all this stuff, and really understanding what's resonating and sitting in those environments and how are people interacting with them. And I just think it seems obvious when you say it out loud, but so many don't invest in making sure that that happens. And, I think taking your teams out to do that gets you to a deeper level of understanding, right? Like, what are people saying? How are they interacting? Like I said, what is resonating? So I love what they do to continue to push authenticity forward and how they're bringing hospitality to retail and how they're being really thoughtful of what those retail adjacent experiences look like to create overall customer value. TJ from Lego, he's the global design director, and our conversation about how Lego puts play to work across all of their retail experiences. It's so on brand for the brand to say that, but it's true in the conversation we had and a conversation I have often with our clients is how are we creating these cross-generational environments when you're seeing, and maybe we'll get to this later in the conversation, you're seeing the rise of Gen Alpha and they're starting to come to the next kind of milestone of age, and then Gen Z coming of age when it comes to kind of being in the workforce. And, there's so many dynamics that happen as each generation kind of goes through their next milestones. And we have these brands that have to kind of resonate with both. And it's not an easy thing. And I think as a brand, they're such an amazing example of being successful at that, right? Like my Gen Alpha daughter and my husband, who's Gen, what is that, X, like they can coexist very harmoniously in a Lego environment, right? And it seems like nothing, but it's not easy to achieve that as a brand and a retailer. And so that conversation of how they've done it with their partnerships at Formula One or the Lego hotel, or their amusement parks, there's so many different formats for which the brand shows up, but you always know it's Lego and it always resonates across generations. And so I love the conversation around how they put play to work in order to achieve that. So those are some of the examples, I think, of really exciting conversations that have happened on the podcast.
I mean, those are some really great examples. I know like part of your job, though, is also to really have a pulse on like the consumer right now. And this has been a very interesting year, a little bit discombobulated, I guess you could say from an economic perspective. So in the midst of all that, there's all this great opportunity out there, brands doing some really exciting stuff. What has stood out to you about consumers and how they're reacting in this environment?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, we talk a lot about value as one of those things. And there's a lot of how do you define value and what is the opportunity of that? And I think that that's relevant across, all brands and in a multitude of ways, because it's not just about price. Yes, it's going to matter. And a lot of the times you have to put, when you pay with your wallet, there's going to be certain elements that make you more price sensitive than not. But, I think especially the younger generations, like, it's no new news. They call bullshit on things. They do their own research. They want brands that will stand for something more than just selling them products. And a lot of that is when they think about value, a lot of them want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And that is a value that a brand can give, right? How are we creating this lifestyle that is meaningful to you and inviting you to be a part of that, of allowing you to be a co-creator in that, allowing you, right, to have a bigger seat at the table in that. And I think they're turning to brands that foster that for them. And so that's one element that I think that people are craving. And also, there's so much conversation, and we recently put out our year-over-year Gen Z report, but they want to be in person with each other. They're living behind screens all the time, and that has its value. And I don't think that's going away because there's an efficiency in it. There's access to communities from a global standpoint, right? And you can kind of get involved in conversations at any point. But because of that, they're also craving other things from these in-person elements. And so who's going to help be that culture carrier, and who's going to create connectivity, and who's going to let them live, maybe their better selves through sustainability initiatives or what have you. And think that's a big element that brands can't underestimate when it comes to importance and how consumers are thinking about brands that drive value beyond just price point.
Yeah, I love those. Those are some really tangible examples of, as you say, value beyond price point, because we have been focused a lot on prices with everything going on in the world.
Yeah.
But if you are a brand who can take it to that other level and create that sense of community and connection, then it feels like money well spent, right? So even if it's just maybe a little bit more than a different brand, you might still, at least this younger generation might still find it worthwhile to go ahead and spend their money with you. So that's a really important context to, I think, this ongoing value conversation, which is probably not going away as we start looking at holiday.
No, I don't think so either. And, like I said, it will still matter. That was one of the other things that came up in our report. Like, they want to live a lot of these things, and sometimes it falls short because of price. And what can brands and retailers do to help close that gap? But it's that saying that will never go away. Like, people will always remember the way you make them feel. And that has longevity, right? So how are you tying that into the experience, whether it's helping them live their values, whether it's community and culture? And then it goes down to all the way, the most important touch point in the store is the store associate, right? And how are you training them up, and how are they utilizing the tools that exist out there, AI, customer profiles, all that stuff, to bring the human element to the otherwise transactional experience and make people really feel seen. And I think when you do that, when you deliver that for somebody, they're going to keep coming back to you.
Retailers are entering a new era, one powered by AI and filled with opportunity. But they shouldn't have to go it alone. Meet Commerce, the new parent brand uniting BigCommerce, Feedonomics, and MakeSwift into one AI-driven ecosystem, connecting all the tools your business needs to adapt faster, scale smarter, and grow with confidence. Commerce's powerful selling solutions help brands turn data into discovery, create storefronts without bottlenecks, and build frictionless shopping experiences that your customers will love. Want to learn more? See how Commerce is powering what's next at commerce.com/retailremix.
Okay, so I want to hear a little bit more about this Gen Z research that just came out. You've already given us a few of the takeaways, but tell us what we should know about what you've learned about Gen Z.
Yeah, so some of the things that we learned about Gen Z, some of our takeaways was back to values. And we define them as aspirational values, right? Because it doesn't always mean that they're going to see some of the things through when it gets to putting their money where their mouth is. And that's due to economic constraints sometimes. But what shouldn't be underestimated is their desire for those things, right? To kind of shop with values in mind, and their craving of authenticity and transparency and even humility, and thinking about the opportunity of that. The co-creator status, which is huge, more than 70% of respondents, and this most recent survey was over 1,000 respondents. More than 70% of them want to engage with brands that they love, beyond the content. They want to be co-creators. They want to be collaborators in the brand journey, even in store design and in product customization. So what's the opportunity of that? And I don't see that going away when we had Alpha right behind it, who lives in co-creation with Roblox and all those tools, right? It's so fluid for them. So I think that that's something to pay attention to. And in some ways, it's kind of low-hanging fruit, and as well, because if you're bringing them to the table to co-create, you're learning all the time, right? About what they're passionate about, what their interests are. I mean, I think from a research standpoint for brands, there's such ripe information that you can garner from creating that dynamic of co-creation and collaboration. Then there's also the community, and we just talked about that as well. 3 out of 5 from the respondents, Gen Z shoppers, say that a leading reason for visiting a store is be able to experience that brand community, right? And fulfilling their desire of having a greater sense of belonging. And I think that's also tied to all the things that we see in social media where, you're part of these virtual communities, but it's a different level of human connection that happens. And this sense of belonging, I think comes from this generation who had very formative years in COVID and in lockdown and at home. And so, right, coming out of that and having come to age, whether it was coming back in their college years or post-graduation, like wanting to belong to something greater than themselves as a huge opportunity, I think, for brands. And cultural awareness, that was a pretty high number too. 60% of Gen Z want to see products or in-store visuals that reflect relevant cultural moments. And that backs into some of the things we just said too of these successful campaigns that have happened. But again, it's got to be with authenticity, not just that you're riding the wave. Sometimes you ride the wave a little bit, like with the Super Bowl, and you don't expect that to happen. And, people are searching for denim. That's a little bit unexpected that you have to harness that. But otherwise, it's the opportunity for the brand to demonstrate awareness of what matters and what's happening in lives today. And then last but not least, sustainability. And I know that this was when we had a lot of internal dialogue. It's like, yeah, they say this, but they don't follow through on it. But that goes back to the opportunity of it. If there's a high demand and interest, right, for living a more sustainable life, but then you're not seeing it totally come to fruition, what can brands and retailers do to help bridge that gap? Because if you can invite them and empower them and equip them with the ability to live the things they want to live, there's a lot of stickiness in that. So if it comes down to the ecosystem's not there yet to bring price points down enough, right, to get them to always speak with their dollars, there other ways. And you see that with brands, Arc'teryx, for example, who elongate the life cycle of a product, right? So if you make an investment into one of their products, you can come back to the store and they'll fix the button or they'll fix, there's other ways that you can offer it to the consumer that builds loyalty as well. And then there's a strong emotional connection that the consumer develops to you as a brand by saying, you're the brand that helped me live that.
Yeah, almost an appreciation. Thank you. You actually made it possible.
Right, exactly.
So I think one of the things that I also found very interesting, though, is that you saw there was quite a divide within the Gen Z subset between older Gen Zers and those on the younger of this generational cohort. So tell us a little bit about the differences you noted between older and younger Gen Zers even.
Yeah, their life stages are different, right? The older Gen Zers, so they're 23, 26, they're entering careers. They're in early stages. They're having more financial responsibility. They're starting to form more of their longer term habits. And then the younger, they're in school, right? Or just graduating. So they're kind of in the earlier stages of adulthood or entering college years, right? Kind of some of them are on the younger side of that. And in our survey, we can only go 18 and up just because legality and stuff of who we could survey. So we don't have as many insights of those that are still in the end of their high school years. But within the 18 to 26, there's differences because of that, right? And you just think of the things that you're exposed to and learning and starting to form when you're still in college to when you're entering your professional career. They differ. The older Gen Zers, they're seeking more structure and connection, and what they look for in brands that reflect their values in real life settings is going to be a little bit different than those that are still in those college years. And they're still leaning much more digital first, and they're probably cusping a little bit more of some of the behaviors that Gen Alphas have, because the younger you are, the more you've been born with technology in your hand and in your everyday life and all of your moments. And there's a fluidity in that. And so it shapes different things as well. And then, like I said, with the responsibilities in life, you're just going to be at different inflection points. And so to group the whole generation into one category is a myth, because of those differences as well, right? And Gen Zers maybe a little bit more purpose-driven at this point, where the younger ones are still a little bit more playful and experiential, and they're still trying to understand their values. I mean, I think we all have evolution of how we associate with values throughout our lives. But when you're having those really early formative years, and those are huge milestones going from high school into college and then entering your career, there's tremendous changes that are happening. And that's why I also think there's an opportunity in inviting them to be co-creators and collaborators, because you're getting a first seat glimpse into what's happening in those critical moments of their life stages and how you're intersecting with them as a brand.
What does this really mean, allowing your customers to co-create with you? Is it primarily something that happens on social media channels? What does it look like in action?
Yeah, I think it could take a lot of different forms. It could be product creation. It could be campaign, messaging, Bubble, which is a skincare line, they've been so successful because they've had this mindset since inception. Shai talks about how they have this like focus group of thousands of Gen Zers who are at the table answering questions about formulation and skincare challenges. What should the packaging look like? What's the product look like? What does the messaging look like? All of those different elements are an opportunity. What kind of partnerships do you want to see? What does collaboration look like to you in those partnerships, right? And I think all of those bring them to the table, and all of those allow brands to learn.
Really interesting. Another thing that Gen Z and younger consumers are known for is the speed which they kind of drive and also jump on online trends. And you've touched on a few, but I imagine this is challenging in a way for a brick and mortar operator who typically doesn't have flexibility to change their inventory or especially their store layouts as quickly as these trends now move online. How can retailers adjust and be flexible with their merchandising and responding to these trends as they emerge? How do you do that from an actual physical store perspective?
Yeah, we talk about modularity in store design all the time, and the ROI you get from that, it's greater too, in that it allows for, it's an ever-changing world, whether it's like a moment-to-moment campaign or the consumer themselves evolving year to year, your product evolution that's happening. And so what you want to display or how you merchandise or how you tell stories is going to always evolve. So you need a foundation that allows for that with modular fixtures and floor plans. And what is the opportunity of technology integration to give you some of that flexibility as well, whether that's digital signage or taking it beyond that. That's a critical aspect. And the other is just the integration and communication that's happening in cross-functional teams. And really breaking down those silos. Like if the store team's not talking to marketing and marketing's not talking to IT and all of that, like it's really challenging to have that fluidity. So, there's the store level, but it's connecting back to the brand as a whole in those moments. And, being able to say, like, we have this campaign coming, here's how it's going to reflect itself on our digital platforms and our physical locations, right? And then also some of those more real-time things that need to happen. And how are we going to reflect that? And that's where maybe digital signage is helpful too, because you can feed it into all your stores at the same time so that there's connectivity with what's happening on your online channels. And we live in a TikTok world, right? And there's those trends that happen, and some are fleeting trends, but some are those trends that you really want to make sure that you're harnessing the opportunity of. And so that collaboration, I think, is critical. And I think that a lot of brands have come a long way in that and being less siloed as they're understanding more and more. It's a 360-degree, experience that the customer expecting to have. And they don't think about a brand, this is my store experience. This is my Instagram experience. This is my brand experience.
Right.
And the only way that you can be successful at that is if all of those different departments are talking to each other.
You touched on this earlier, kind of the cross-generational challenge. And I think we all as an industry have been very focused on Gen Z, but they're of course not the only people out there shopping. We just published some research recently showing that Gen X is actually the highest spending generational cohort and is going to be for some time still. So do you think retailers risk alienating older or maybe even younger shoppers by trying to cater to a specific generation like Gen Z? How can you be sure that your store is accommodating and exciting to everyone? Is it even possible to do that? Or do you really kind of need to pick, like, this is my generation I'm focusing on?
I think it depends from brand to brand, right?
Of
But
course.
you always want to make sure you understand your core, and that core is going to always be evolving. And then when you have more cross-generational, right? So I'm just trying to think of a few examples, like Urban Outfitters, and I've had Shea on my podcast, and always an innovative thinker, but they're part of a family of brands. Like Urban is constantly getting a new, right? Because you're getting that coming of age generation and the way in which they're evolving. You have to really be studying that, I think, from year to year. And that like they're going into college and above. And so you got that entry point. And then you have an Anthropologie, which is an adjacent brand in the family of brands. And that one's probably more cross-generational, where you're probably scooping up some of the urban shoppers, but then you have more of the Gen X, and then you also have older than that, right? And so there's two brands, for example, that have synergies, and they're all part of like a family of brands, but they have one brand that I think kind of lives where they probably have to be a little bit more targeted at their core, right? And then they have another one that probably has to flex a little bit more, but their core probably tends to be a little bit older, but they want to grab that younger one as well. So it's an art more so, right? It's an art and a science at the same time. and thinking about that. I also think, for example, PacSun, I think Brienne's done an amazing job over the years of like being innovative and bringing in collaborations and transforming that brand that used to kind of be like, I don't know, a little more skater, a little bit younger, a little bit more male driven to like a little bit more female centric now. But also I talk to plenty of moms who's like, I'll shop PacSun too. And they're not the target audience, but the campaigns that they're creating is resonating beyond just that core younger demographic. And I think that's because a lot of it has this larger cultural relevance, and the partnerships that they're pursuing. So it's an art that should be backed up with data and science, but it's a tricky thing because you don't want to be so alienating, but it's a little bit case by case, I think, from a brand perspective as well.
Yeah. Thinking too, just on your early example of the Lego store. I mean, talk about cross-generational appeal. And that's also partly just a credit to the product itself. I mean, I don't think Legos ever stop being fun, no matter how old you are, but their stores are fun for adults and kids alike. So they really navigate that just so beautifully.
They do. They do. And what they decide to partner with, right? Whether it's like Yoda from Star Wars or if it's like, that Friends collection that they had. I mean, so it takes a lot of thought process and thinking about what that spectrum should look like.
Yeah. So looking ahead now to the second half of the year, what do you think are going to be the really critical elements of the in-store experience in this holiday period, in this kind of complicated year?
Yeah, complicated is a good way to put it for sure. I mean, who knows? But lean into value, pricing will matter too. And holidays, that does get to be a little bit more forefront, I think. But making sure throughout the year you're building loyalty through value beyond just price, I think, because then you're top of mind, right? You don't want to wait till just then. But like making sure that you're thinking about how you're continually to communicate value and deliver value. Experiential and immersive design, I think, is critical as well. People want an experience, right? We have had a lot of conversation about the experience economy and them choosing travel and other things. And some of that's starting to slow down due to cost too, and maybe travel fatigue or maybe even the craziness that's going on with airports in general. And so how can you scoop up some of that opportunity, right? Like going shopping has always been a retail therapy experience, right? So how are you making it something that feels special and it's filled with surprise and delight and there's additive elements to it that will resonate across age groups? Maybe how are you thinking about some of those adjacent experiences like we're talking about with like, Coach and Formula One and with cafes and restaurants and Lego and Formula One and other things too that you can bring to the experience. Convenience is an important one too. We just helped open a Nordstrom local in Williamsburg, right? And that's like bringing that brand closer to the neighborhood. And that's all about convenience and experience. And, for them, this is bringing them one step closer to the shopper when it comes to holiday, right? Like you're ordering ahead, you're doing buy online, pick up store, and you're making it much more seamless for those in that neighborhood that might not, trek all the way to Midtown to go to the store, and all those elements that make it as frictionless as possible for the consumer is also helpful. And we really should think about how you're making sure that infrastructure and those logistics are in a great place for that higher season. And otherwise, they're going to go to Amazon and shop Prime, and that's going to be easy, right? So we got to think about how we stay more competitive in those ways, and just think about the other digital tools that you put in the hands of the store associate, right? I think we think about consumer-facing technology all the time, but think about all that behind the scenes kind of magic that also helps as well. And thinking about how can the store associate be concierge service-like to the consumer in those moments. You have so much data around consumers today, around what they've searched for, what they've shopped in the past, and how are you using that? We have these ChatGPT AI tools. Like, what can that do for the store associate in store, right? To create really intelligent on-the-spot recommendations that additive to what the shopper is walking in the door already knowing.
Yeah. I wonder, as you're talking, I'm just wondering, like, is there an escapism play to make this holiday season, like, come to our store and just get away from all of it,
Yeah, we'll make it simple for you.
Escape to our store. And you don't even have to fly there.
Yes. What is the Willy Wonka experience that they'll create for everybody?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. Now, before we let you go, we have our last little set of fun rapid fire questions for our mixtape segment. Are you ready for those?
Okay.
They're easy and fun.
Yes. Yes.
The first one is your most favorite store or shopping locale. Like basically, what is your retail happy place?
A retail happy place for me is like, I actually want to cut through the noise when I go in store. And so I know you're going to ask, I think you said online and offline, and there are different reasons, right? Like if I go online, Sephora wins for me because the app experience makes it frictionless. They remember what I've shopped before. They remember it's my birthday. If they run out of a product, they have a recommendation. This also could be the right skin tone for you and all of that. But I am very challenged with their in-store experience because it feels chaotic to
It's
me, and I actually
overwhelming,
don't
right?
feel at ease. I'm very overwhelmed.
Sephora stores do overwhelm me. Yeah.
But I love their online, right?
Yeah.
And part of it's just they're so popular, and Gen Alpha, Gen Z, every generation loves them. And so it's a lot. So there's that. And then when it comes to in-store, yeah, I kind of like that aspect of like that quiet luxury, and it feels curated, and the products are merchandised in a way that like kind of organically problem solve for me with outfitting and things like that. And I think a lot of the higher contemporary brands do a great job at that, whether that's like a Stout or a Zimmerman or Ulla Johnson, or, there's a lot of just inspiration that I think carries over well from online. It breeds, it feels like a lifestyle experience when you're in there. It's probably dangerous on the other end for me because I'm adding +1 to the cart every time I go into those stores. But you know what I mean? There's just like a soothing
There's like
aspect that
space
happens
to
in there.
discover. Yeah, like a store where you can really just explore. I agree. That's always nice because then it does feel a little bit like an escape too.
Right. Yeah.
What is the biggest way that you think Gen Z is changing the retail experience?
I mean, I don't think co-creation is a new thing, but I think the way in which they lean into it and the way in which they utilize digital tools to be able to do that, I think is changing the experience. And I think it's going to be a good tee up to Gen Alpha, who I think is going to take it to the next level when we think about co-creation and their digital fluency.
What is one viral trend that you love and one that you just don't get?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I love the viral trends of education. So I'm not going to pick like a trend in isolation. I'm going to pick it a little bit more thematically. But I love the viral trends of education because I'm learning all the time that way. And I love the sharing of that. And I think that a lot of it goes back to the heart of what social media kind of was for, right? That good sharing. And I love it for myself. And I even love it for my daughter. Like the things she learns from watching YouTube blows my mind sometimes, of like how she could crochet, and it's developed this mindset of like, I don't know how to do it. I can figure out how to do it because there's going to be this amazing accessible teacher on the other side, right?
You remember that woman during the pandemic, or maybe it was a little before, who built an entire home with her kids just watching YouTube?
Yeah. And some of those should have like disclaimers. Some of those still need permits.
Right. But still, I was like, it is that the idea of that you can figure out almost anything, that this information resource is at your fingertips. I agree with you, is really cool. I don't think we remind ourselves of that enough.
I know. That's the part I love. One of the trends I don't get. I remember back when that went around with like, what was it? Is it white or blue, or is it purple?
Oh,
remember
the dresses? Yeah. Yeah, but that's so
I still
freaky.
Don't understand it.
Yeah.
It's so
I don't
freaky.
understand how it happens. I don't get like these videos I've been getting lately of just watching people do really mundane tasks, like pack their suitcase or like
people love it.
Fill jars in their kitchen. And I'm like, this is stuff I don't really even want to do in real life. Why do I want to watch someone else do it in my free time? But like you say, there are people out there who really love it.
They really, and some of those things I'm like staring at and I'm like, what am I missing? Like, I think I'm an intelligent person. Like, what about this is making it work? Sometimes I grab my daughter because that younger generation is all about content. And I think sometimes it's in the editing. It's like editing magic, just quick move things that are happening. That
or
just
something.
Yeah.
Okay, last one is best piece of advice you've received in your career.
I mean, just have an always learning mentality, and it's even with the conversation we just had, right? I've learned over time to recognize just because I don't get it doesn't mean it's not valid. And so just sometimes if it's not working, I'm even thinking, okay, why didn't it work? What am I doing differently? What are we seeing in the opportunity of learning from it not working? And I think just having always that open-mindedness to be a constant student is one of the best career advice that I've received.
I love that. And I love that question because I always feel like I just get such good advice for myself from it. So thank you for that. And thank you for being here with us today, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole. It was really great to speak with you.
And thanks to all of you for listening. I hope you learned a lot today. I know I did. As always, we'd love to continue the conversation with you on LinkedIn on the Retail Touchpoints page. Stop by and tell us what stores you're loving right now and who else you want to hear from as the world of retail gears up for the holiday season. Talk to you all soon. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Retail Remix. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. Until next time, keep mixing it up.